Imagine you live in one of the poorest countries in the world. Your basic human rights are constantly abused. You don't know basically anything about the world outside of borders. But then you watch a film where your government says that your country, in fact, is the best in the world, and you're led into a happy future by the leader as great as the sun. Would you believe it? Propaganda film is a terrifying tool that government uses to pursue people into what they want them to believe. According to Richard A. Nelson, propaganda is an intentional and systematic form of persuasion with ideological, political, or commercial purposes, with the intent of influencing the emotions, attitudes, opinions, and actions of groups of specific recipients. In early 20th century, specifically film propaganda became a popular choice for totalitarian regimes to achieve their goals. According to Carolina Perdreras, the importance of cinema as a tool for propaganda is manifested, for example, when Lenin pointed out in the early 1920s that for us cinema is the most important of all arts. The conception of cinema as a channel for the political messages was greatly enhanced in the mid-20th century with the rise of dictatorships. To some, film propaganda is one of the main instruments in the toolbox of a totalitarian regime. North Korean regime relies heavily on film propaganda. Since the start of this country, film propaganda was used to install communist ideology and cult of personality of Kim Il-sung. According to Dukalskis and Huka, the ideological content aims to portray how an ideal North Korean citizen should look, feel, and behave, by emphasizing not only self-reliance but also sacrifice and communal dedication to building a prosperous and morally pure nation. Kim Il-sung made sure everyone in North Korea saw films he instructed to make to install messages useful for the regime. Dukalskis and Huka say that mobile film groups were sent throughout the countryside to show Soviet and Korean-produced films projected onto the sides of buildings or sheets stretched between two poles, and also in schools, work units, and even in military institutions. Those films propagate the idea of juche for North Koreans and even foreigners. Perdreras writes that juche is an ideological construction which roughly translates to self-identity or self-reliance, which embraces Korean nationalism and was first introduced by Kim Il-sung on December 28, 1955, and soon became the nation's governing precept. Film became even more important for North Korean government with the arrival of second ruler, Kim Jong-il. According to Perdreras, Kim Jong-il has been recognized as a faithful follower of the cinema or cinephile. Under his rule, North Korean most famous propaganda films inside the country and outside of it were created, with most notable examples in my opinion being Pulgasari and The Flower Girl. Pulgasari is a classic example of North Korean propaganda film. Although being one of the most popular North Korean films outside of the country, it is still built on the ideas of juche and communism. It was directed by Shin Sang-ok, who was allegedly kidnapped together with his ex-wife Choi Eun-hee by Kim Jong-il in hopes to make internationally acclaimed film. Pulgasari is set in medieval Korea and is telling a story about farmers rebelling against their government with the help of giant dragon-like monster Pulgasari. Some sort of working class were suffering, and an uprising against landlords or governors, foreign or not, is a classic narrative not only for North Korean films but communist film in general. Cultural production in North Korea, like in USSR, was supply-driven rather than demand-driven, according to Armstrong. Film ends with Pulgasari, who was helping villages all along, demanding more and more iron from them, the same way governors were, resulting in him establishing a ruling over the people, but then being defeated by the female main character's self-sacrifice. At first I couldn't understand why Pulgasari, who was a positive character throughout the whole film, suddenly becomes a villain in the end. Dukalskis and Huka have an interesting take on it. North Korean film clearly locates the possibility of political agency primarily within the virtue of suffering. However, this agency is specifically not the discovery of bourgeois individual freedom to choose or act. It is an agency enabled by the leader, realized within the family and constrained by the nation. North Korean film cannot show working class being successful in their rebellion without help of Kim Il-sung, furthermore installing his cult of personality. According to Schoner, North Korea has a long history of films featuring medieval rebellions, and all those heroic rebellions are portrayed as having failed. They were doomed to fail because there were no real leader, which would only arrive with the appearance of Kim Il-sung. To sum up, Pulgasari is a confusing film in terms of ideology. On one hand, it propagates to stand up against oppressors, but on the other shows that rebellion is pointless unless Kim Il-sung is supporting you. The Flower Girl is another example of North Korean propaganda film. It is such an important film for the regime that even one won banknote has image of the Flower Girl. Opera the film is based on is supposedly written by Kim Il-sung. It tells the story of Kopun, whose whole family is suffering because of the occupation of the country and class inequality in general. Padrers writes that although Japanese are never shown in the film, there is no shortage of references to Japan and to harm it has done. The enemy is so huge it's impossible to represent on screen. It's practically a fight against evil ideology that destroys all forms of social equality. Practically nearly 2 hours of the film are just filled with suffering of Korean people, and then 5 minutes before the film ends, Kopun's brother, thought to be dead before, appears and gives a revolutionary speech. They're finding out that he is a part of Korean's People Revolutionary Army, led by Kim Il-sung, although he never appears in the film. And all the oppressed working class rises up against landowners and creates a happy life with everyone being equal unlike before. Samit writes, Cho Young's speech is addressed to the people, not the people depicted in a fiction film, but the North Koreans watching it. The film weaves together a series of shots to construct a discourse that the audience can empathize with and that make them feel part of the revolution. I think North Korean cinema shows so much suffering on the screen to justify and normalize the actual suffering North Koreans face under the totalitarian regime. Dukalskis and Huka say that North Korean films inscribe a politics of sacrifice in everyday life. While the viewer sometimes sees sycophantic adoration of the leadership, he more often sees regular people heroically coping with struggles in a poor, rural country. In conclusion, film propaganda, unfortunately, is a useful tool for controlling a group of people. North Korea adopted this tactic almost since the birth of the country. They constantly produce films filled with useful ideological messages, such as Cult of Personality of Kim Il-sung, showing that it is worse to constantly suffer if it is for greater good of the country.